Hey folks, this is Lee Scandinaro with MeadvilleCalendar.com. I'm here with some cool people. Do you guys want to say, like, I don't know, who you are and what's going on today? Let's just start with the first letter of the alphabet.
Okay. I'm Aubrey Hall. I'm a junior at Allegheny, and I was part of the Mediaville listening project this season, focusing on addiction and recovery in Meadville.
Awesome. Let's just keep going.
I'm Emily Yochim. I'm a professor in the communication, film, and theater department at Allegheny, and I've been running and running the Mediaville listening project for the past 5 years at Allegheny.
I'm Luke Foster, and I am also a junior at Allegheny, and I was also involved in the Mediaville listening project season 5 that was focusing on addiction and recovery.
I'm Selena Williams. I'm a sophomore at Allegheny College. I major in communication arts with a minor in community and justice studies. And I was also part of the Mediaville listening project this semester for the first time. So I'm excited.
All right, cool. So we keep hearing this word Mediaville. I can't tell if you guys are just mispronouncing the name of our town or what, but maybe Emily, maybe you can start us off by just giving us kind of a brief picture, like what is Mediaville and why?
Yeah, sure. So the Mediaville Listening Project is a student produced podcast that is created in conjunction with community members. We have a website and a series of podcasts, and every year we focus on a different segment of Meadville and the surrounding area to kind of tell the story of everyday life in Meadville, and specifically to think about how everyday life and media are intertwined. And it really started with a class about 5 years ago, and they said, let's do this every year and see what happens. So here we are.
Very cool. And, so for all of you, like everyday life, this season's about like addiction and recovery. What does that even mean? Like, tell us, like, what does it mean to dig into the everyday life of addiction and recovery?
Well, I think it's an ethnographic methods class that the podcast is for. And part of the idea that we talked about in class around like grounded theory is like you're not coming up with these like really heady conceptual things to kind of project on and explain the world. It's like you go to the world first and kind of ask just questions like you just asked us, like what does it mean to be experiencing addiction and experiencing recovery in the specific place of Crawford County. So really, yeah, like the whole purpose was to just kind of dive into it curious and then just kind of see what presented itself to us rather than talking about like what we thought addiction and recovery is and then trying to see if we can map that out throughout Crawford County. I don't know if Selena, you wanted to add to that.
Yeah, just kind of building off of that. That's the kind of beautiful thing about this project is how interpersonal it is and how truly community-based it is. I mean, through us as a class and as a group, we're merely just providing a platform for people in the community to just speak for themselves. We're not trying to contextualize or conceptualize any of their experiences. We're merely just letting them speak fully about their experiences, which is not really offered for people who struggle with addiction and recovery in any sort of community or town. So that was why this was so important. Particularly like my project, my episode was shedding light on unsung stories. And those unsung stories are the stories that are complete opposite of like the monolithic stereotype infused ones that we often hear. The stereotypes that we get that addiction is a personal failure or a personal choice, or it's linked with minority groups and it's linked with people in poverty. And so it's just making room for other stories and other ideas and just really trying to contextualize people's experiences. And so really just trying to, tackle the unchecked biases that, are so relevant and pervasive and, get to the root of like where they're coming from and stuff like that.
Well, and I certainly appreciate the topic, particularly because I don't know, a couple years ago, we entered into this opioid epidemic And then like, you know, a couple months ago, it's like, oh, well, we're in a pandemic now. So it's like, we're not in an opioid epidemic still. So it's certainly a pertinent issue that's kind of been almost tossed to the side in the wake of everything else going on. So I really appreciate you guys kind of bringing it back to light. I don't know if one of you wants to maybe dig into like what was like, what I want to hear a little bit about like the process from like start to finish, like from, you know, like what does it mean to make a podcast? And I also want to hear kind of like, what was it like talking to people and like, what did you learn talking to people?
So the process of making a podcast was actually very interesting, and a lot more went into it than I had previously thought, because I wasn't like a huge podcast guy kind of before this. So it was really interesting to learn kind of about the background information that you need to know kind of beforehand. When we were kind of going into our interviews, we had certain things that we were looking for. But we were also trying to, again, like Selena and Aubrey were saying, you know, like let the people we were interviewing speak. And so a big part of it was the preparation and kind of trying to overwrite those biases or preconceived notions that we may have had about addiction and recovery. So that was a huge part of it. And then the really interesting part was after the interviews, you know, kind of going back in and digging into all of the cool things and very interesting stories that we heard. And it was just it was such a great experience overall to hear what these people had to say about their experiences that, again, are very often like overwritten and kind of like used with stereotypes. So it was just a really very informative process.
Yeah. Just kind of going off of that, and while it was we interviewed maybe like 20 people, I think the most amazing part of it for me was just seeing how much commonality there were just among like just so many like people, you know. And like we did like once we did the interviews, we all as individual, whoever we had for our interviewees, we went through coding, and then we coded as like a group, and then we just found like certain themes that stuck out for each group, and that's kind of how we went from there, really building the story.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. And I love this concept that I think Aubrey kind of mentioned earlier, and you guys are kind of really alluding to here, which is like, you know, rather than spending so much time kind of thinking about things in the theoretical, you know, starting with the personal and then embedding that in the theoretical, and doing that through ethnography. And maybe we'll wrap up. Emily, if you just want to say like, why do you do ethnographies, and why do you force students to do them too? Why are they important? Why do we do them?
My evil plan as a professor. So I learned ethnography. I was a student at Allegheny, and I learned ethnography as a student at Allegheny before I went on to grad school, and learned even more about it. But for me, ethnography and sort of interviewing people and spending time with them in their everyday lives is really a way to understand the complexities of people's lives and understand the sort of contingencies of people's lives, and to really start to bring theory to life as well. So I always think of a lot of my work is really about sort of meeting people where they are, and forging connections with them and forging conversations with them. So that's from a kind of academic and scholarly perspective. But for me, the reason I want Allegheny students to do ethnography as part of their curriculum in Meadville is really because I think it's such a rich way of forging connections between students and community members. That was always the most important part of the Mediaville listening project to me, is that students are learning to listen to community members. They're learning from community members as opposed to just going out and doing something in the community. It's all about just sort of learning more and expanding their understanding of community members' lives in different ways. And for me, and I'll just, you know, the final thing I'll say about that is what I find most rewarding about this class is seeing the connections that students start to make with all kinds of different community members in different ways. And they make that connection at the moment of the interview. And then they make that connection at the moment of the Mediaville listening party, and just watching those conversations grow and build I think is really critical for shaping and shifting students' relationships to Meadville and students' relationships to Allegheny as well. So when students say to me, oh, I saw my interviewee at the grocery store, and it's not happening right now, right? But in past times when they're out in Meadville and they run into people who have been part of this project and they just have a small moment of connection with them, I find that actually really, really powerful. And I think those relationships matter in a lot of different ways. So that's why I do it.
Yeah, and I'll share that excitement too. I know, just like, it's fun to have these kind of connections, right? I mean, like, someone messaged me after an interview with one of the students. I don't know if it was one of you or someone else, but and just said like, hey, I ended up doing the interview and I like really enjoyed it, and it was nice talking to that person. And I was like, this is so random, but also like so beautiful that this is happening. So I really appreciate all your work. Of course, we'll link in the video the website so people can access the stories and access all the amazing supplemental material that goes along with these stories. Awesome. Cool. Well, thank you all so much, and we'll see you on the town, Meadville.